How did self-improvement content turn into resentment for women? Today's episode is about understanding the red pill pipeline, what it is, who it targets, why it works, and why it matters. You're listening to Fed Up but Figuring It Out, unpacking politics, culture, and global power. If you ever thought, why does this all feel like bullshit? You're in the right place. I'm your host, Pri Mignot. As always, everything cited throughout this episode will be in this episode's description. Before we dive into the nitty-gritty of what the red pill pipeline is and what the manosphere is, I really want to preface this video by saying I'm not talking about all men specifically, and I'm not saying that men are the problem. A lot of men support women's rights and social equality and equity, but there is this growing subsect of people, and particularly men, who are being pulled towards radical ideas, and that deserves attention, not dismissal. So we do have to talk about these things. For those who don't know, the red pill pipeline is derived from the term the red pill from the Matrix. And in the Matrix, when you take the red pill, you see the truth. And it comes from this term because people who consume this type of content believe they are being fed the truth and that everyone else is being deluded and has no idea what's happening in the real world. Online, it often refers to content that claims men are being lied to about dating, feminism, power, and gender roles. And it's apparently a thing that all of society's in on. It's a big lie and a big conspiracy theory. And these men are seeing the truth through this content. The real truth that these content influencers try to showcase is that the world is anti-male. They're trying to give people an idea that everything is anti-male and everything is against men. And that is the truth they're missing. That's the truth that they can't see. And it's the idea that men are the one true and only victims of the system that literally fucks everyone. So, yes, yes, men are victims of systems, but simultaneously, in this world, they're being painted as the only victim, and it is all of equality's fault, and women's fault, and gay people's faults, and racial people's faults, that they are the victims of the situation. And it's that's the truth that they're trying to sell in this red pill pipeline. And I really need to emphasize that it is a pipeline. It's not a single belief. Often people start at one end and then they slowly consume content and get trickled out and put down further into it. Typically, it often starts with men looking for advice online about self-help things, fitness, dating advice, men's mental health, all these topics that all of us go online for. These things that seem very harmless at the beginning and can remain harmless, but seem very harmless at the beginning, can kind of funnel into this thing called the red pill pipeline. And through the pipeline, these ideas and these large concepts that we all look for answers for gradually shift towards anti-feminism content, mocking femininity, mocking women, and those under the LGBTQ plus umbrella. It turns into resentment for different groups. It turns into resentment for just everyone. Gender essentialism, political radicalization, and a denial of history. So again, it starts out very harmless. It's just the way that the algorithm filters these things through, pulls these men and these young boys through this pipeline into these really misogynistic and unpleasant and unhealthy spaces to be in online. And this end destination is often referred to as the manosphere. So if you've ever heard the term manosphere, that is what they're talking about. They're talking about the end kind of thing of the red pill pipeline. And that is that whole kind of digital space online. The manosphere largely refers to a digital collection of websites, videos, and forums that all promote men's supremacy and advocate for traditional gender roles. And these men in the manosphere often position themselves as men's rights activists. So you may have heard of them. They're also the abbreviation is MRA. And these men rights activists believe that men are being slighted in our global society and that it's because gender roles are shifting. It's because women have power. It's because of all these different things. And don't get me wrong, I understand the frustration with the systems we live in because, again, these systems don't work for everyone. And so that's also just very complicated. But the answer is not to to target other minorities. It's not to target women. It's not to target queer people. It's not to target like racial people, like people of different ethnic backgrounds. It's so this manosphere though is the idea that these men rights activists are like, I'm advocating for men's rights because men are the victims in society. And again, like the manosphere really has these ties to like white supremacy and anti-LGBTQ plus rhetoric and anti-Semitism even. So it's all just a very yucky area of the internet to be in. And as we've talked about previously, it's an echo chamber and you get stuck in these systems. So that's honestly the main concern is if me or you heard this kind of language on the street or people talking about these things, there's counterpoints, there's counter narratives to talk to. There's different ways to approach that information. Whereas when you're online and all of us are chronically online and you get pushed into that pipeline and pushed in that circle, it's really hard to get out of. And the people in that circle have to wake up and realize that they want out of it. There's not many ways else. There's not many other ways for them to leave. And you might be sitting there thinking, okay, Priya, but how do I know the difference between a hateful movement and just like a douchebag with a microphone? The problem is that the movement is the people in it. The people are the people that contribute to it are in it. And like, it's not even that men realize they're in it. And that's like the big concern in many ways. They might not even clue into that's what they're doing. Because they might just be like, oh, this is just dating advice. This is just dating advice. This is just dating advice. Or like, this is my gym influencer. And maybe he's talking about politics, but he's my gym influencer or something like that. And it's just, it seems so harmless, but the messages that are being regurgitated in this space are not harmless even slightly. And so it's not even that the men who have the microphones know what they're doing. A lot of them do, mind you, a lot of them do. And I'm going to tell you right now, they're probably not very happy in their own lives. Despite what they're trying to sell. They're trying to sell men on like these dating advices and this lifestyle advice and all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, you must be a very unhappy person to be talking like this. Um, but all these people who regurgitate this type of content that's like anti-feminist and white supremacist and like all this kind of stuff contribute to this movement. So in a matter of weeks, young boys who go online, who are looking for guidance and relatability, could be turned into a pawn for the red pill movement. They might not even know what's happening. And that's the thing, it doesn't start extreme, but it becomes extreme. Let's talk about the target audience for the red pill pipeline and the manosphere. It's typically young men, and even occasionally young boys. It's even been shown that boys as young as like 11, 10, 12 entering this pipeline. And especially at that age, your brain is so malleable and you don't have a construct of like necessarily what to look for in the world that it is so easy to suck them in. And the manosphere and the people who are creating content for the red pill pipeline know that. So they automatically target the vulnerable. It is often a lot of young teens and young boys, and then like even young men in their 20s getting sucked into this and then just not finding a way out. And don't get me wrong, there's men older in life that are getting sucked into this, but they're not as necessarily insecure, unstable in their lives. I feel like the younger you are, you're trying to figure out who you are. You're trying to figure out your space. You're trying to figure out your where your feet are at kind of thing. And being online and being in online spaces really does help a lot of people with their identity shaping. But that is why these content influencers and the algorithms target these young boys. Dr. Gail Saltz, an associate professor of psychiatry at the New York Presbyterian Hospital, recommends that parents be aware of behaviors that could point to mental health struggles, such as more time alone with a device, mood changes, or poor grades in school. Parents need to keep an eye on their teens' social media usage. And this is boys and girls, like there's extreme content either ways. But specifically for the red pill pipeline, a lot of parents don't even know their sons are going into it. Whatever the relationship is, a lot of people can't see the young boys that they care about falling into these like online spaces. It's super easy for them to, because like many teenagers who are dealing with physical or romantic insecurities may become curious about a variety of internet, like male internet creators, and inadvertently enter the manosphere through gaming or health spaces when they're not consuming their media with a critical eye. Like if you're not aware of the red flags in place, then you're not even going to notice them. And again, these are really young kids that they're targeting and young men. And you need to have the media literacy and the critical thinking and the life background to be like, okay, this is bad. This is not how I view women. This is not how people should treat people. This is not, I don't think history is wrong. All this kind of stuff. So it is really interesting because there's not those guardrails necessarily in place. And so this content typically targets those who don't have like that kind of set in stone guardrails yet, which is really concerning. In one mother's TikTok video, which amassed over 2.4 million views, she explained how an offhand comment hinted to her that her son may have been exposed to the manosphere content, and content that like was harmful to women. She says, quote, "We were just having a normal conversation and he said to me, well, women are gold diggers anyway," end quote. So then the mom in this video starts questioning her son's line of thinking. She goes like, "Why do you think that? Do you think the women in your life are gold diggers, yada, yada, yada?" And he says no. Like, he doesn't actually believe that. But this is the content he's consuming. And so he couldn't come up with a single woman he knew in his own life that was a gold digger. And so she pivoted and asked for his sourcing. And she's like, "Do you think," the mom asked the son, she's like, "Do you think the men in these videos that you're watching, do they even know what they're talking about? Do they have any functional relationships? Do they have any healthy relationships with women?" And typically the answer to all three is no. Typically it's like they actually have no goddamn clue what they're talking about. And it's just like a confident, strong voice, and people my voice for that, a confident, strong voice telling boys what they want to hear, telling them that it's not their fault that they can't get a girlfriend. It's because women have too much power now. It's because, and there's like this common misconception in the manosphere that 80% of women only want 20% of guys. And it's like, you need to be the toughest and like all of this like super macho bullshit. And that's not even close to true. And it's all these different lies that they sell to men that make them believe it. It's just so easy to consume and so readily available that these boys are taking it in without considering what they're hearing. And that kind of information goes into their brain, and it's not that they're critically thinking about it. So it just like seeps into their consciousness. And that is why it is so dangerous, is because it's like you might not inadvertently have no idea the guy you're talking to has been consuming Manosphere content or red pill content. And then you give it like a couple weeks and you hear an offhand comment and then you hear another offhand comment and you're like, okay, all this kind of stuff is like pointing for red pill content. And then you're like, oh, you're actually in it. You're in it. And we can have a conversation, but you are so disconnected from reality that it doesn't even matter. So again, the red pill pipeline typically targets those who are lonely, economically uncertain, socially disconnected, sexually rejected or not experiencing romantic attachment, and are confused about their masculinity. Because again, we talked about in this previous episode, masculinity is confusing. Like, we're all confused about like what it means to be our gender. And I think there's a lot of talk right now about what it means to be a man. And there are so many different versions coming at people, and they just want a solid answer. They want something they can attach themselves to. And so the red pill content often gives these young boys and young men an idea of what it is to be a man. And let me tell you, none of that is the correct way to do it, but it gives a sense of assurance to these young boys. And it especially targets those who are struggling with dating, who are feeling left behind, who are lacking an offline community, and are just generally feeling insecure. And we've all felt insecure, so it's a pretty easy rabbit hole to fall into. Again, the reason it works for these boys is because it offers clear answers, albeit untruthful answers, but answers to complex problems. And it gives these boys someone to look up to. It's like a role model for them. These guys in the manosphere world. According to a reporter named Jonah Foster, he found that many men saw the appeal of red pill influencers because of the material wealth status they possessed, arguing that they must be doing something right to like accumulate that much wealth, to accumulate the women and the money and the power and all this kind of stuff. And I hate to break it to you, that's definitely not the case. Because yeah, there's a lot of guys with microphones and people are like, oh, they're super successful. Let me tell you, this microphone was $60, team. All the software I use is free. Like, anyone can start a podcast. That doesn't mean that they know what they're talking about. That doesn't mean they have power. That doesn't mean anything else. It's just like this idea of like, this person looks successful because of the things they have and the things they're allowed to say. And I want to be like them. It's more of an aesthetic craving that Foster argues draws these people in. So it's like these guys who flash their lifestyle of girls and cars and money all while preaching that women no longer respect men and that men have gone soft. And that is a big concept in here, is that like in the manosphere, it's like women don't respect you. They don't care about you. You can use them and bitch them, like kind of idea. And that men who get attached and form connections and have humanity, which is like again humanistic, um, and like how we operate, they're the ones who have soft. They're the ones who have gone wrong. And again, if you think about it all critically, all of that's bullshit, but a lot of people don't. A lot of men also end up in here again because again, Foster points out, because of the concept of masculinity confusing them. And mind you, I think masculinity confuses everyone because of this such a rigid definition, and we don't have a rigid definition for femininity. It's just a bit of a wreck in the concept of that you need something to hold on to for dear life to be a man. Again, he points out that most of these men rights activists in the manosphere are either in like the super rich category or entering that kind of category, and they sell the lie that the more alpha you can get, or if you get alpha enough, which means just like douchebaggy enough and strong enough, ideally, is what they're kind of selling, you'll get that too. You'll get to be rich. You'll get to do all that kind of stuff. I don't want to break this to you, anyone, but that's not going to happen.
That's kind of harsh.
It's a harsh world.
It's an unattainable ideal they're selling. And why do you even want that ideal? No women respect those men because they're assholes. And most people are not going to be in the ultra rich category. And again, that feeds into that insecurity. Like, why don't I have that money? Why don't I look strong enough? And this cycle and this area of the internet actually makes insecurities worse, because you're seeing all these men who are saying like, this is what's wrong with you. This is what has to change. And it's like, it's such an unhealthy space even for men to be in, and it makes things just dramatically worse. And then they become even more, a lot of men, not all men in this space, but a lot of men who don't leave the manosphere become more and more insecure, and they compensate with that by being more of a douchebag and more of an alpha, because they're like, I need to prove my masculinity somehow. I can't measure up financially, and I can't measure up necessarily physically, or whatever the case is. And I know I'm not getting all the girls, and I can't get the cars, or whatever the case is. And so they're like, I'm just gonna increase this persona of this super toxic masculine dude. And that is not the answer either. Because the newsflash is you're not going to get to that ultra rich. You're never going to be enough of an alpha. Alpha, again, I say that very loosely because it's a stupid word. To do these things, to have that money, to have the girls, to have the cars, to have the lifestyle. Like, all of that is fake. Again, the manosphere offers something to blame. It doesn't, you don't have to take any accountability for what's going on in your life. You're just like, oh no, I can't do this because of this. And not to say that everything that is going on in your life, like financial insecurity, relationship insecurity, all this kind of stuff, physical insecurity, all of that is not necessarily your fault as an individual. But in this manosphere, there's no accountability. There's no accountability. And so in a regular world, you take accountability because, yeah, part of the things that happen are your fault. Part of the things that are going on in your life, you have to take accountability for. And a lot of it, again, you can't, but that doesn't mean you blame. Again, it ties into everything we've been talking about this whole season about how, like, politicians will blame minorities for problems when it's not their fault at all. And the manosphere will blame women for these problems when it's not their fault at all. It's just an easy thing to blame rather than the entire systems that set this whole thing up. The manosphere also offers a sense of belonging, and it's sort of a form of grooming for these men because they trickle in and they get more and more groomed to be accepted into the manosphere as they go through this pipeline. And the entire thing, as we said, is grounded in false facts. And so, like, men will start consuming content that's like gateway content, like fitness influencer content, whatever else. And then they're all of a sudden on a video that promotes the idea that men are superior. And that one should assume power over women. And a lot of the things that are said in the manosphere, because again, if you had a critical opinion and you had the facts to back it up, you'd be like, all this stuff is lies. All of it's lies. But a lot of the things that are said in the Red Pill pipeline and in this content, all of the views are kind of spread on the basis of false fact. Like, this is a fact, and it's like they'll say like something's a fact, and it's absolutely not a fact. Andrew Tate, who is a notorious person in the manosphere and literally a terrible human being, but in an interview with the podcaster named James English said, quote, "When you're a realist, you're a sexist. There's no way you can be rooted in reality and not be sexist," end quote. And like, it's not just Andrew Tate who says this kind of shit. It's like a bunch of people in this world that use the fake basis of common sense and realism to perpetuate the baseless claim with no real facts. So they often just say, "This is common sense, this is realistic," and it's like, no, it's not. Not even close isn't realistic. And it ties into the, again, like this idea of like being a realist is like seeing the truth. And that's where that comes in, is they think you're seeing the truth when you're like, oh, I now understand the world's against men. And it's like, where did you, that's not the truth. You just, and then they sell it based on like, I'm a realist. And it's like, you're also not a realist. Like, all of this stuff is lies. And it's like the supposed truth about gender roles. Like, and mind you, it doesn't help that there are women content creators in the red pill pipeline, that kind of cater to the perception of men's perceived victimhood. And those women are just so very problematic. There's not a ton, like it's definitely way more dominated by male content creators, but there is a couple women in there as well. This area of the internet frames men as victims of feminism, victims of the modern society, victims of political correctness, and that men are the only victims in the situation, not minority groups. They're not, there's no other victims in the situation. It's just men. And they'll often use examples like military drafts or domestic violence cases against men, or like men need to be the breadwinner and all this pressure. And it's absolutely nuts because as much as men are perceived as victims to the modern society and all these different things and to all these certain examples they put out there, men are also simultaneously not allowed to be victims in this. They are not allowed to be weak or perceived as weak in this online community. So they're not even allowed to be victims of certain situations because that is perceived as weakness, that is perceived as emotional, and you're not allowed to be those things, which is ironic because you're allowed to be angry, and that's an emotion. And like an example of this is like Terry Crews, a well-known actor, has discussed his experience with sexual assault, and he was heavily ridiculed by this community because real men dominate. I say in quotes, real men dominate. And so even though he is a victim of sexual assault and he has spoken about it and he's like, we need to raise awareness about this issue. And it's like, yes, you're right, absolutely. The men who simultaneously cry victim and cry wolf, when something happens, they're like, that's on you. And it's like, you're not playing either side right. And in this case, Terry Crews is a victim. Like, it's just weird that you're not allowed to be, and simultaneously you were only allowed to be a victim in the manosphere. And like the commentary about like men being drafted in the military. We've talked about this in a previous episode. Men made the draft. Men made the laws that made men go into the military draft. Men have historically created nearly every war. And so you can, and they get mad at women in the manosphere for the draft. And it's like, you can get mad at the system. Women had no necessarily say in the matter of how the system was built, of how the draft was set up. And but that's not women's fault that you're getting put in the military draft. And I think a lot of feminists and a lot of feminist streams offer counter narratives to the breadwinner and draft narratives. Like, we don't want either of those things to be the case. And feminist streams of thought and a lot of content also support victims of sexual assault, whether they're men or women. And again, we're not talking about all men. We are talking about the men who fall into this pipeline. And it is becoming an increasing issue. So we just need to talk about it because it's ridiculous that it's even happening. One man named Kelvin went into the manosphere and kind of talked about his experience coming out of it. And when asked what the most extreme thing he encountered in these like alt-right spaces, because again, the red pill content is extreme right. It's not left, I'll tell you, but it is extreme right. And so the question was, what are these extreme things that you've encountered in this alt-right narrative? And he said he was shocked at the denial of well-documented historical facts. And for example, for this, he would say that like a lot of people in this manosphere content would say like quote unquote slavery was not that bad, or black people victimized themselves. It's not has nothing to do with historical facts because the history doesn't actually exist in the manosphere content. It just doesn't, it's not real. And there's even like talk about how the Holocaust didn't happen and that Jews control media. Like, it is such a denial of basic truth that it's insane that anyone even falls for it. But yeah, it's not even that they lie about sorts of constructs like gender roles and what women want and what men need to be and all this kind of stuff. Like, all that's lies. But they also will lie about the stuff you learn in school. They'll also lie about historical events. They'll also say this didn't happen. Or it doesn't fit their narrative. It doesn't fit the narrative that men are victims. It doesn't fit the narrative that typically in this space, white men are the victims of everything. And it's like, well, if you look at slavery and you look at the Holocaust and you look at history, the facts don't line up with that. So, of course, they're going to deny that. Again, because of the echo chamber, this like denial of history and the victimization, like all this fundamental untruthful space is being created. But it creates a dangerous level of like groupthink and closed loop thinking, which again, there's no counter narratives to in this space, pushes people who want to argue these points, or even if you're in the manosphere, you're like, actually, I agree with everything you said about how women hate men, but I'm now confused of why you're saying the Holocaust isn't real because that definitely happened. And then it's like you're getting pushed out because it's like, no, you have to just believe everything you see in this perfect little bubble for you to exist in this bubble. And again, this it creates such a false sense of reality that it is deeply concerning. It quite literally creates like a cult-like community online. The further men go into this manosphere and through the red pill pipeline, the more violent and entitled they become. And we can kind of see this with like the existence of incels. And incels are considered involuntary celibates. Um, and they are an extremely dangerous group. They hate women. And in the fact that they want to be violent towards them. And the further and incels exist within the manosphere. They exist the further you go down into the manosphere and the further you go into this pipeline. And I could do a whole episode on them, but it is very deeply concerning that they even exist. Yeah, it just becomes more violent and derogatory and more all-consuming of just hatred. It doesn't give any hope, it doesn't provide any love, it doesn't provide any humanity to these men. It just creates this community and this cult of hatred and dissatisfaction. And it's like, why are you doing that to yourselves? Even like I understand propaganda works, but it is not helping you even in the slightest. If you haven't noticed, a lot of the content we've talked about so far this episode ties back to different themes from earlier this season. Like, for example, the men's mental health episode we talked about, which the men's mental health issue right now is very serious and it's real and it's undersupported. And a lot of that comes down to like men aren't forming these close connections. They're not allowing themselves to open up emotionally. They're killing themselves at higher rates. And the problem with the manosphere is that this pipeline kind of acknowledges that pain, that you're unsatisfied, that you're depressed, that you're not getting what you want. But it redirects it towards anger and not healing. It doesn't give you a space to become a better person. It doesn't give you a space to become a better in general. But it eats you. It literally just eats the person alive eventually in some ways. This hatred and this discontent. And so that it ties into that aspect, like because the men's mental health crisis, men are vulnerable and they're falling into these things. The other kind of thing it touches on is like the idea of populism, which is like the elite versus ordinary people logic. And in this context, in the manosphere, feminists, academics, media, and women, they become the elite enemy. They're not like us. They're against us. Everything that you see that is sexual and women based and historical and all that kind of stuff, all of that is actually targeted against women. And it just replaces like the complex structural things that are happening with easy, simple villains. And the villain is the opposite gender. And so that's also just a concern. It's like it's populism, not in a political sense, not like in the political party sense, but it is like targeting ordinary people versus the elite people, which is just women and academics and stuff like that. But ties into echo chambers, as we've already said. It's like an algorithmic thing. And the algorithms feed and reward outrage. And again, the content escalates over time, and it's very hard to get out of these spaces because you're in an echo chamber and you can't leave. And these dissenting voices, the people that don't agree with these things, are disappearing. There's no counter narratives to these arguments. Again, Foster points out when he was like kind of in these spaces, what made the content so inescapable was the algorithm. He mentions how on YouTube, a recommended clip would lead to another, and then each suddenly reinforcing the ideas about masculinity, gender, and society. It's not even that men are like, let me look up a video on why should I hate women 101, or why men are getting shorted out of relationships, or what's going on. And it's not even that they're looking at that. It's just like slowly feeding into it, and it just keeps going. And that is an algorithmic problem. Because it, as much as the algorithm can put people in really loving and healthy spaces in some ways, it can also put people in these really nasty spaces that they don't know how to get out of. The other main concept it ties to throughout the season is masculinity. And the manosphere really panders and sells the idea that masculinity is under threat because of other minority groups. Only these men in the red pill pipeline can teach men what a real man is. But just like we talked about, patriarchal masculinity is a prison that leaves men very little room for individuality or humanity. It's not healthy for men to like look up and want to strive to be these men. It's just so not realistic, this toxic masculine idea. And it dehumanizes men in many ways, the content in this in this pipeline. It dehumanizes them because they claim that men should only want transactional, emotionally detached relationships. And it dehumanizes women to make them meaningless sex objects. It just makes men feel like they should be able to be on their own. And that's not how we're built. Like, we are built for connection. So it is so dehumanizing to be like, no, you shouldn't connect emotionally to anyone. You shouldn't trust anyone. You shouldn't have attachments to everyone. Don't show you love at anyone. Like, all that kind of stuff is talked about in the manosphere because it's like women will get you. Like, women are like psychological witches or something like that. It's so dehumanizing, not only to women and not only to every other group in the world, but it is so dehumanizing to men to like treat them as if they don't want connection. And it leaves no room for cross gender or even like same gender friendships, honestly. The reason that this is so concerning is because it has social and relationship impacts. There is this rising hostility in some ways between genders and a growing distrust in dating and relationships. And maybe we've all seen it, or maybe I have just seen it, but there is this kind of like, when I go on a date, I'm like, is this man consuming red pill content? Will I know right away? And that is also concerning because I'm like, if you're consuming that content, I don't want to date you. Because that's dangerous. Like, that's not healthy. And so a lot of women who are in this space who are realizing that quite a few men are consuming this content are just opting out of dating entirely. They're like, we're done. Because it's just not worth it. And because of this, I think a lot of men, or some men, I guess, who go into this pipeline, some men are feeling increasingly resentful and isolated as a result of what is happening with dating. And the manosphere again, like, regurgitates and reasserts these self-esteem issues for men. They're scared they aren't measuring up. And I don't mean to burst your bubble here again, but like, typically women find men less attractive the further they go into the manosphere. Like, the manosphere men, the content creators, are not attractive to most women. They are like the worst of the worst. And women are opting out of dating rather than meeting any men who are like falling into those role as following those guys as like role models, okay? So it's not the manosphere is not even attractive to women. And yet that's what men are kind of sold in it, that they're like they'll get the girl based on like this kind of stuff. So it is having these social and relationship impacts. And again, like tying into dating, there is a growing gap between men and women's values. And maybe that's always existed. For example, political views are someone's values. What you value shows up in how you vote. And the question is often, I've heard many times, is why would I join my life with someone who didn't share my values? And that doesn't mean you can't vote for different parties. It just also means like, if my values are this, why would I be with someone who actively votes against them? And this also was really reinforced for minorities, so this includes women, but also people who are intersectionally a minority, because they typically have more to lose when right-leaning parties are elected. So like abortion rights or immigration rights or queer rights, like all this stuff is on the table for when right-leaning parties get elected, and that is deeply concerning to a lot of people. Why would people actively pursue relationships with people who vote against their rights? That doesn't make any sense. And it is just this concern, and I think we see it more in the States. So political and ideological polarization is affecting the dating. It just is. Men tend to vote more conservatively, and women tend to vote more liberally. And that is not just in the States, that is also becoming a serious divider in dating, but also in Canada. Like, a lot of Democratic women will not date Republican men. And similarly here, even like, and I mean, it's a little bit less extreme in Canada because it is a little less extreme in Canada because we have multiple parties. Um, but there is even a growing divide. Like, I know some women will not date conservatives. And I think it's just this also just this growing fear of like, I don't know if these men are conservative because they're fiscally conservative and they believe in this kind of stuff, fine, or they conservative because they're consuming red pill content and they don't believe in women's rights. It's just that much of a divide in what you're looking at. And so I think that is deeply concerning to a lot of people. I'm not saying that the dating market is exactly a direct causation or solely a causation of the manosphere, but the manosphere is definitely a contributing factor into how people vote, and it's also a contributing factor into how people date. Like, it is such a deep concern to be dating someone who's consuming red pill content for a lot of women. And that is why they just steer completely clear of dating anyone who's even right leaning, because it's like, we don't know what you're seeing, we don't know what you're consuming, and do you treat women like humans? Like, and it's just like that kind of stuff. And again, it's not all men, it's not the majority of men, but it is a decent amount of men that a lot of women are just nervous. The other concern is that media literacy is already struggling. Many people don't know how to verify sources and they don't recognize ideological framing in the content they're consuming. They don't see the very clear lenses that are being put on top of it. And this is particularly worsened for men in many ways because a growing subset of men are not pursuing post secondary education. And that is not because education makes someone better, and it's not because you have to pursue a post-secondary education or like that makes you a better person or smarter or anything like that. But it is a little concerning because post-secondary education often teaches source evaluation, critical thinking, and media literacy. And so post-secondary education and education in general at any institution is not the be-all end-all, and you don't have to have those things. But a lack of exposure to critical analysis makes people more vulnerable to misinformation. And if you're not taught how to critically examine media, then you're going to fall for it probably. And that is just another concern, is that this manosphere content relies on people not being able to think critically. It relies on people just accepting a false narrative. And if you have the skills to be like, okay, this is the ideological framing behind this, this is the critical thinking behind this is the media literacy behind it, all that kind of stuff, it blocks it more and more, and you are not as likely to fall down that pipeline. So again, post-secondary, I'm not saying post-secondary education is for everyone, and I'm not saying you should go to it just for this reason, but I am saying that it is concerning because a lot more women are in post-secondary education now, and it's like, okay, we're seeing the things that are going wrong. It's definitely a bit of a concern. The question is like, how big is this problem? How big is the manosphere? It isn't a fringe thing anymore, and I wish it was, but it's not a fringe thing. I'm not going to say the majority of men are in it. But I'm definitely going to say it is a subsect of men and is a growing subsect of men. And that is deeply concerning. Like, for example, Andrew Tate, Joe Rogan, and Ben Shapiro, who are all manosphere influencers, have over 7 million followers on YouTube. Um, and even like certain academics, like Jordan Peterson, are kind of becoming a part of this. Like, and it's the attraction is that these men often have like confidence and certainty and like have this clear gender hierarchy they have in mind. And that is the concern, is that these men they seem like they have it all together, but they don't. And this this manosphere space has millions of followers, especially young men. And these influential men who are contributing and pushing this movement forward, they often knowingly, and I mean some unknowingly, but the vast majority knowingly are sowing division and hurting men even more. But they don't care because it makes them money. They don't care about the individual person because it makes them money, and outrage makes money. So that is also the concern, is that these men do not care about these young boys and these young men in this pipeline. They do not care. But they're okay with it because they're making money. And again, this is not most men. I'm going to reiterate that because I think a lot of people get mad about it, but it is not most men, but it is a growing subsect of men, and that is deeply concerning. It is a growing and influential minority of men, and we have to talk about it. We can even see this in the last US election. Like there was really this belief that Harris was going to sweep the Gen Z votes across the nation. And women followed that assumption, but men didn't. 65% of young white men voted for Trump. And in an article, it points out that in recent years, the nation has seen a steady rise in conservatism among white youth. And I'm not going to say again that that's the manosphere, but it is that concern that that is the content they're consuming and that is why they're voting that way. Because this space online is increasing exploitation and capitalization on men's insecurities. They don't care. It makes these people, these content creators money. And they're promoting polarization, but they're fueled by like the ultra wealthy, and it's just like a mess. It's just an absolute mess because there's no emotional safe space in the manosphere. And as much as the men are victims in this space, it's like they aren't allowed to be. And these content creators are fueling this hatred and fueling this completely false narrative and creating this false reality for these young men. And they're leaving them there. There is not, because there's no healing happening in that space. To reiterate, the manosphere really does like draw on the fact, draw people in because of its simple explanations, the tradition of roles, and the promise of restored status. It really does show all these things, and it really frames progress as like a theft of like manhood and a theft of like what these men deserve. And for men who already feel powerless or insecure, this narrative is like extremely validating. Because it doesn't, again, it doesn't radicalize through hatred first. You don't start with hatred. It starts with identity. Like you don't have this because something identity, but then it goes into hatred. Like you should have these things, and this is the person's fault that you don't. So why this all matters is that it's not about canceling or like shaming anyone because propaganda can happen to everyone. I also have heard the narrative before, and I can understand the confusion and the contradiction with it in many ways, is that why should I care about men or the manosphere when they never extend the same courtesy to me? Says every group oppressed by men ever. And I was watching this woman's video, and she had a really great point. She was talking about the manosphere, and I listened to like a whole hour long video of hers. But she was saying that she really struggles to pull men out of it and want to pull men out of it because she's like, these men don't respect me as a human being. And it was a black woman, so she has even more valid reason to say that. But it was like this, I don't care about saving them. Like I want them to come back and be better people, but like I don't have the energy, and why would I put myself in that situation when I know that they don't see me as human? And it's like I totally get it, like 100%. It's totally valid and to like to dip out of this whole situation. And it's hard because I think every woman and every person has been hurt or dehumanized and violated by men. And that's also men. Men also hurt, dehumanize, and violate men. But all of us have been hurt by men before, and like right now the manosphere is them digging their own grave. It's their own fault that they're in it in many ways. The problem is people can change and they can be rehabilitated. And if you're like, that ain't for me, I don't want to do it, there's actually no shame in that for me. I don't think that's a problem. But I also think we shouldn't put down people who are actively trying to pull men out of this space or trying to shed light on the red pill pipeline and the manosphere. Because I think there's also like this shame where it's like feminist spaces shouldn't be focusing on men's issues. But simultaneously, this is all of us issue. This is a concern for everyone. And if you don't want to do the work to pull these men out of the manosphere and you don't want to talk about the red pill pipeline, you don't want to talk about the manosphere because like that is them digging their own grave, fair. I just think we also can't shame people for trying to do that or trying to pull them out of that because that's also important work. And the truth is, at the end of the day, the men who are indoctrinated into the manosphere, they have to do the heavy lifting and learn empathy for themselves and others and understand that it's not a weakness that they've been programmed to believe. Like they have to pull themselves out of that system. And like all the articles I've read for this episode about men who have fallen into the manosphere or red pill pipeline, all of them say that they realized that they were in it. They something clicked in their head that they were like, this content is no longer serving me. It's not correct. It's actually hurting my relationships. And they had to pull themselves out of it. So there has to be a level of awareness within these men in this space that they are in the space that isn't healthy, and that comes from their own internal reflection. And you can't make anyone do that. So that is also the problem. So it's like as much as like we can talk about the red pill pipeline and the manosphere and say like all this stuff is bad and be concerned, they have to do the heavy lifting and get themselves out of it. And that's not to say don't lend your help, don't lend a hand when men are trying to get out of it, but at the same time, you don't need to spend your entire life trying to pull people up when they don't want to be saved. Because the reality of like talking about the manosphere is that we're trying to prevent further polarization and we're trying to promote support and like we're trying to support healthier models of masculinity and improve media literacy. And when all those things come into play, there are less men, that men are less likely to fall into this. And for the men who might be in this pipeline, it's important for themselves to ask, like, what happens when my pain is monetized? Who is benefiting from this anger and from this pain? And who does it benefit to keep people angry? People should recognize that we can all be victims of being radicalized and question everything we hear or see, especially if it's being used to justify atrocities or like dehumanization. We need to start checking ourselves, and that is for everyone. I think we could all use a lesson in that, especially the men who are starting to like be feeling insecurity and going online for this kind of stuff. It's just important to start asking yourself these questions and like what is going on, whose ideological framing is this, and whatever else. At the end of the day, most men believe in equality, and most men want connection and not conflict. But ignoring this pipeline and ignoring this online sphere is not going to make it disappear. Understanding what the manosphere is and what the red pill pipeline is the first step towards better conversation and better policy on this stuff and better relationships. And so we need to be talking about it. And that's not to like fearmonger, that's not to like freak people out, but it is to say like we need to be talking about this because it is a growing concern. If we don't talk about how people fall into these spaces, we'll never be able to talk about how to bring them back out. Thanks for tuning in. If you had an aha moment or enjoyed this episode, pass it along to a friend, drop a quick review, and let's keep chatting over on Instagram. Let me know what you thought of today's episode and share this with others who you think might also enjoy learning about the manosphere. Sharing is caring and it helps this podcast grow. I'll see you in the next one.